Map, filter, and reduce. We all use these array methods a lot of times while developing our JavaScript applications. And these are amongst one of the most asked questions in JavaScript interviews. Interviewers absolutely love to confuse candidates by questions like how they work, difference between them, creating these functions from scratch, etc. So map, filter, reduce are basically array methods that are used to iterate over an array and perform a transformation or computation. Each may or may not return a new array based on the result of the function. So in this video, I'll be explaining each one of them one by one, make polyfills for them from absolute scratch, and discuss some commonly asked interview questions. So I've opened VS Code over here with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And when I go on to run this, we have this window over here. So I'm gonna quickly open the console because that is where we are gonna see our output. Alright, so let's start by discussing each map, filter, and reduce separately. And this is a very basic question that interviewers ask on this topic. So first, we're gonna discuss what is map. So the map method is used for creating a new array from existing one by applying a function to each one of the elements of the first array. So let me show you. If I go on and type const nums array, and I'm gonna give, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now what I want to do is I want to multiply each of these elements by 5 and return a new array to me. So I can create a new variable, const multiply 3. And inside of this, we're going to type nums, and here map comes in the picture. So I'm going to type map, and this takes a callback function. So we're going to provide a function over here, and this function takes 3 things. First is the current element. So it's going to iterate through all of these elements, right? So it's going to take the current element. So let's say I'm going to give this num. And second will be the index, that is this 0, 1, 2. So index, and the third will be the actual array. That is this array. So we're going to say ARR. In this case, we're not going to use index or the array. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to go inside and say return num into 3. And what this will do is it's going to take each element of this array and multiply by 3 and return it. And it's going to return a completely new array inside of this multiply 3. So let's go on and console log this. And let's see the output. Yep, you see, we have a completely new array with all of the elements multiplied by 3. Now, if you would like to see what this index does is, let's say we add index in this as well. So it should give us result like 3, like this. 1 into 3 plus 0, and then 2 into 3 plus 1, something like that. So let's find out. Yep, we have 3, 7, 11, and 15. So this is how a map array method works. So let's see what filter is. So the filter method takes each element in an array and it applies a conditional statement against it. If the conditional returns true, the element gets pushed into the output array. If the condition returns false, the element does not get pushed into the output array. In short, filter returns only those elements from the array which fulfills the provided criteria. So let me show you. So let's say we have const, and what we want to do is we want to only return the elements which are more than 2. So I'm going to give it more than 2 name, and I'll say nums dot filter. And inside of this, again, this is going to take a callback function, and this will again take those 3 things: num, index, and the array. So num. But in this case as well, we don't need index and array, so I'm just not going to write them. So return if num is more than 2. Let's console log this, more than 2. Let's find out. Yep, you see, we only returned the elements that were more than 2 inside of this more than 2 array. So this is what filter does. And you can clearly notice that its syntax is similar to map, except the function returns true to keep the element or false to not return it. Now, the reduce method is probably most complicated of all 3. The reduce method reduces an array of values down to just one value. Just like map and filter, reduce also executes the callback for each element of the array. So it receives 2 things. So let me show you. So if I write const sum. So what we want over here is we want to calculate the sum of all of these elements. We want to reduce this array down to just one value, which is going to be the sum of this array. So I'm going to write const sum equals nums dot reduce. And now this is going to take two things. As you can see over here, it's going to take one callback function and an initial value. So I'm going to write the callback function over here. And the second parameter is going to be the initial value. So I'm going to keep the initial value as 0. Now this callback function's parameters are a little bit different from what map and filter had. So this has an accumulator, the current value, the index, and our array. So what are these accumulator and the current value? So accumulator is basically the result of the previous computation. Right now there is no computation at the beginning, right? So this is going to be 0 initially. The current value is the current element of the array, obviously. And then we have the index and the array. So what we're going to do over here is we're going to return accumulator plus the current value. So it's going to start by 0 and it's going to add 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like that, it's going to make the sum of this complete array and return to us. So let me just quickly console log this. So let's see. And here you see, we get this 10 as the sum of this array. Awesome. Now don't worry if you're having trouble understanding them now. We are going to discuss output questions on each one of them as we move forward in this video. But let's first start with how we can create each one of them from absolute scratch. That is their polyfills. So first let's create the polyfill for map. So I'm going to write array dot prototype dot, and I'm going to give this some custom name. So I'm going to say, let's say my map. And don't worry if you don't know anything about prototypes. I'm going to bring a separate video on prototype and prototypal inheritance, etc. So do click on subscribe button if you're excited for that video. So what this prototype is doing is it's adding this my map function to the methods of this array in our current JavaScript file. So this will take a function. I'm not going to give this any name. And for the parameters, it's going to take a callback. So let me write the map syntax over here quickly. So we have array.map, and map takes a callback, which inside of it takes the current value, index, and the array. So we're going to reference this and create the polyfill for our mymap function. Okay. Now inside of this takes a callback. Now, so map returns a completely new array, right? So to create a new array, we will need an empty array first. So let's declare let temp to be an empty array. And now inside of this, since we are going to iterate through each element of the array, we're going to have a for loop, which will start from 0, go to this dot length. So I've written this dot length over here is because obviously we're going to, when we use this mymap function, we're going to write something like this. Array.mymap. So since this is the part of this array, so when we use this inside of it, it's going to reference our parent array. So this here means basically the array that we are working on. Now inside of this, since we have this callback condition, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to say temp, that is this temporary output array, temp dot push. And what are we going to push? We're going to push the computation of this callback. I'll say callback, and I'm going to provide these three things: the current element, index, and the array. So the current element is this of this index. So I'm going to write this, that is our array, and the index I. Second one is the index, so I'm just going to write I. And the third one is the actual array, so I'm just going to write this. And now I will return temp. And that's it. This is our custom map function. Congrats. So let's try this out and see if it works as expected. So this was the example that we discussed while understanding the map. So let's remove this dot map over here, and I'm going to use my map polyfill. And let's save this and see. Yep, it works as expected. Great. Now let's go on and create the polyfill for filter. So to create the polyfill for filter, it's going to be absolutely same as it was for map. So I'm going to say array.prototype.filter. And it's going to take a callback just like map. And inside of this, since this also returns an array, so I'm going to have let temp empty. Cool. Now again, since we are iterating through each of the values, so I'm going to write for loop Okay, so things are absolutely same up until this point. So what is the difference between map and filter? So map basically returns each and every value and modifies it according to the condition of the callback, right? But filter only returns those values which satisfy the condition of callback, not each and every element. So in the map, we used to do this temp dot push, and then inside of this, we gave callback and the current element, index, and the array to it, right? But we're not gonna do that over here. We're gonna first check if callback satisfies the condition. So callback will have the current element, that is this of I, the index, and the current array, that is this. And if this satisfies the condition, then we're gonna push the current element, that is this of I, just like that. And in the end, we're gonna return temp. That's all we need to do. And I'm gonna name this my filter actually, so that it doesn't clashes with the pre-existing filter function inside of the array prototype. So here's that example that you discussed while understanding filter. So let's replace this filter with my filter and test to see if it works, which it does. Cool. Let's discuss the polyfill for reduce. Okay, so the polyfill for reduce, it's a little different from map and function, as you know. So it takes two things. One is a callback and the other is the initial value. So initial value, just like that. Inside this function, we're gonna say callback, comma, initial value. And this callback has how many things? It has the accumulator, the current value, the index, and the array. So we're gonna work according to this syntax. Now inside of this, we would first need to initialize the accumulator, so with the initial value. So I'll write var accumulator equals initial value. Okay, so that's done. Now next, obviously we're gonna iterate through all of the elements of the array, so we're gonna need the for loop. Now inside of this for loop, so I missed one point while explaining reduce. So what happens if the user fails to give the initial value? So in our case, we gave the initial value as 0, right? But what if he fails to give the initial value, any initial value? So what happens is accumulator takes the first element of the array as the initial value, and the current value is assigned the second element of the array. So we're gonna check over here, accumulator equals accumulator. We're gonna check if there's anything inside of the accumulator, then that's fine. We're gonna go inside of the callback and execute it by providing the accumulator, the current value, which is this of I, and the index and the current array, that is this. Cool. But what if it doesn't have anything inside of it? Then we will first go on and assign it the first element of the array. So we will say this of I, I, just like that. And now when it comes to another loop, it's gonna already have the initial value as the first element of the array. Now after this loop ends, it's gonna have the final value of a reduce function inside of this accumulator. So we're gonna just return accumulator, just like that. And that's it. This is our polyfill for reduce function. Let's test it out. So again, we have the example that we used to understand the reduce. So I'm just gonna replace it with my reduce. Save it. Let's see. Yep, still got the same output. So I hope you are able to understand how you can go on and create these functions from absolute scratch, and these are really important for the JavaScript interviews. Now there's one question which is really commonly asked in these JavaScript interviews, that is map versus forEach. So this question was asked to me in my Unacademy interview, on which I have made a complete video, and here is the clip to that question. What is the difference between map and forEach? So to explain this, we're gonna take an array with, let's say, 2, 5, 3, 4, some random values. Now first of all, what are map and forEach? These both are array functions to loop through the items of the array. So if I go on and say arr.map, and we're gonna provide a callback over here, so just like this, And now we can perform any operation on this array. So let's say return AR plus 2. So what this will do is it's gonna return the whole array with 2 added to each item of the array. It's not going to modify the original array. Whereas if we do this for each, this performs like a normal for loop, but this doesn't return anything, just like map does. So if I go on and say const map result and const for each result, and go on and console log both of these. Now let's go to our browser and open the console. So we get an array in the result of the map. So it returned us the array but didn't modify the original array. So it returned us a new array with all of the items having a +2, but the for each didn't return us anything. So both of these functions have a different use case. Let's say if we want to modify this array, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take the index and I'll say of I. Yes. So what this will do is it will modify the original array. So let's say I'm gonna add 3 to it, and now I'll console log this array. This was the array from the map, and this was the modified array, which was ARR, our original array. Now this was the first difference. Now the second difference is that you can chain stuff on map. So I can say dot and something. We can let's say if we want to do dot filter and do some operation inside of this filter, so we can do that with map. But in for each, since it doesn't return any array, we cannot chain other methods after it. Alright, now let's discuss some output based questions which involve the use of map, filter and reduce. So let's say if the interviewer provided with this array called students, which has the data for 4 students with name, roll number and marks inside of each of the object. So the first question the interviewer gave is that you need to return only the name of students in capital letters. So there can be multiple approaches to this question. You can either use the traditional for loop, or you can use the for each, or you can use a map. So let's see what would have been the case if we used the traditional for loop. We would have created a new array first of all. So let names, we would have ran a for loop. And inside this for loop, we would have said names dot push. We're gonna push only the name of the student, and we will take each of the element. So I'll say I and take the name and make it to uppercase, and that's it. And then we will print this, console log this names. Let's see the output. Yep, we get the output, that's fine. But this code looks a little messy. Let's clean this up by using map. So I'll say const names, and I'm gonna make this one-liner. So I'll say students dot map, and let's say stu for the current element, and I'll say stu dot name dot to uppercase. That's it. That's all we needed to do, and we are done with this just one line of code. Let's see the output, and we get the same output. All right, pause. If you're not yet following me on Twitter, go to twitter.com/piyush_eon or click the link in the description down below and hit that follow button right now. I'm waiting for you. I'm still waiting. Okay, fine. Let's continue with the video. Now, the second output question is return only the details of those students who scored more than 60 marks. So I want you to try this yourself. And what do you think? Which function are we going to use to solve this question? Pause the video right now and solve it. Okay, I hope you have solved it yourself. So I'm going to show you the answer. So we will have a variable called details, and inside of it, I'm going to take students dot filter. We're going to use filter function. Now we will take stu and we will add the condition. What was the condition? The marks have to be more than 60. So stu dot marks to be more than 60. And that's all. That's all we needed to do to calculate the answer. And let's see the output. We get 2 elements of the array, and both of these students had marks more than 60. And those who didn't have marks more than 60 were filtered out from the array. Now the next question can be return the details of only those students who have marks greater than 60 and roll number greater than 15. So I think it's gonna be same as the previous question. So I'll write students dot value, and inside of it I'll write students dot marks have to be more than 60. Okay, that's fine. And the other condition is that roll number has to be greater than 15. So stu dot roll number has to be greater than 15. Let's see the output for this. I'm gonna console log details, and only one of the students had marks more than 60 and roll number greater than 15. Now the next question is we need to calculate the sum of marks of all of these students. So you already know what we're gonna use here. We're gonna use reduce. So reduce. We will take the accumulator and the current value. Oops, I mean comma. Now here we will just simply say accumulator plus the current value dot marks. That is the current element. That is this one. And we're going to take the marks. So we took the marks over here. And here you can provide the initial value as 0. And let's see, const sum equals, and I'm gonna console log sum. So let's see. Yep, we get the sum of all of the marks of all of the students. Great. Now these questions were really straightforward. Now there can be questions which may involve use of more than one function. That is, you may need to use map or filter together, filter or reduce together. So let's see those type of questions. Our next question is to return only names of the students who scored more than 60. So we already seen this part, and we already saw this part as well. We saw this part in map, and we saw this part in filter. So we're gonna need to combine both of them somehow. So I say constant names students dot filter. First of all, we're gonna filter out those students which have less marks than 60 or more marks than 60. Sorry, I'll say stu marks. Oops, I mean stu dot marks has to be more than 60. That's fine. This is gonna return us all of the students with marks more than 60. Now, as I discussed in my map versus forEach video, and I forgot to mention this over here in this video, that all of these functions, map, filter, and reduce, allows chaining. We can chain other functions in front of these functions. So the output of this filter can be chained by typing dot map or dot filter or dot reduce. So I'm gonna map through the result of this condition right here. So I will say stu and stu dot name. We are only supposed to return the name. So this should do it. Let's see, names. And awesome. So we only got the name of those students which have scored more than 60. Okay, so our last question is a bit complicated. So this says return total marks for the students with marks greater than 60 after 20 marks have been added to those students who scored less than 60. So all of those students who have marks less than 60 got a grace of 20 more marks. So 20 marks will be added to those students. And after that, we are supposed to return only those students which have marks greater than 60 after the addition of 20 marks, of course. And then for those particular students, we are supposed to calculate total marks, the sum of total marks of those students. So let's see. We're going to say const total marks. And I will say students dot, first of all, we're going to do the map. So inside this map, I will take student and I will say if student marks are less than 60, we're going to provide them a 20 marks grace. So I will say stu dot marks and we're going to add 20 to it. And then we will return that particular student. That's all. Let's see the output for this one before moving forward. So these students had less marks than 60, Kaushal and Dilpreet. So they got 20 marks extra. Cool. So this one works. Now we are going to chain another function that is filter over here. And we're going to filter out all those students with marks greater than 60. So I'll say student and student.marks greater than 60. Let's see the output now. Okay, one of the students which had less marks than 60 got removed. And now we're supposed to return the total marks for the students. So we will chain another reduce over here to calculate the sum. So accumulator and the current value. Just like previously, I'm going to take the accumulator and add the current value dot marks and provide the initial value as 0. And that's it. I think this should do it. Let's find out. 224. Amazing. We got the output. So you see, these type of questions can be asked to you during your JavaScript interviews. And since you're watching this channel, you'll definitely able to crack them. So hit the like on this video if you want me to create more such awesome JavaScript interview videos. And the complete playlist for this JavaScript interview series will be in the description down below. And obviously, don't forget to subscribe or your code will give you errors.